morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. I heard a couple people. Good morning. Hi, Bonnie. Thanks for having me today. It's hard shoes to fill from that keynote because my topic is very much similar, and it is about some of the work of INORMS group. So I represent the Society of Research Management, or Society of Research Managers International, SRAI, on the INORMS working group that developed the scope framework as well as the more than our rank framework. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the framework and the work that we've done, and then apply some context how we at the University of Kentucky are starting to use it for responsible research evaluation. So first, why even do responsible research evaluation or assessment? Well, like this morning in the keynote, it's to ensure staff well-being and manage a lot of reputational risks. We make better decisions when we do things responsibly, when we think them through, and we also can help ensure a return on investment. So no longer is it about just publications, but we can make sure that as institutions we're investing in areas that are creating societal impact. It also establishes operational readiness. In the United States, there's lots of investment in the National Science Foundation, and if we responsibly evaluate our researchers, we're better prepared to tap into those resources. And then also it helps us maintain that institutional autonomy. As mentioned again earlier this morning, there are other frameworks out there. I'm not going to go into detail about DORA or the Leiden Manifesto or the metric tide. But I am going to talk about the scope framework for responsible evaluation. It is a 5-step process that the INORMS working group started with, and it is really focused, using this diagram here, on starting with what you value, creating context considerations, looking at the options for evaluating, and then probing deeply. When we think about probing deeply, it's should we evaluate in the first place? And then, of course, evaluate your evaluation. There are 3 guiding principles of the scope framework: to evaluate only where necessary and when necessary, evaluate with the evaluated, so having them a part of the process about what matters to them as a researcher, and then draw on research on evaluation expertise. Use people trained in evaluation and assessment practices to better understand those qualitative and quantitative indicators. So this is a graphic here. Do we value what's important for us or for others? So this is an art gallery. Well, how much is this painting? Well, it all depends on how much you value it. It's in the eye of the beholder. So the scope framework, I'm not going to go into detail with the 25 minutes that I have, but it does start with what you value. So in higher education, sometimes we focus, and in the United States, often we focus on what others value. What do ranking agencies value? What does the US News and World Report value for student enrollment figures and things like that? Let's see. But we also want to think about institutional autonomy and its importance. Every institution has unique missions and goals and service areas, and so we need to think about that instead of thinking about what others in Washington, D.C. or other places value, or we'll lose that autonomy. If we're introducing performance indicators, what sort of performances are we actually measuring? How do we prioritize those values? Also, there's inherent tensions between what you value and what you want to stay alive. Where those tensions exist, ask yourself what you can do about them. So if we value the H-index, what can we actually do about that, right? How does that make a societal impact? And so often we value what we think we can measure rather than measuring what we actually value. So here again is another cartoon. So this individual has lost their wallet. And so the police officer said, "Is this where you lost your wallet?" And the individual says, "No, I lost my wallet in the park, but this is where the light is, so this is where I'm looking." And so really, we want to think about what we value and then measure and evaluate that against our mission. So why are we evaluating? I mentioned context matters. We measure to analyze science of science activities, the study of the phenomenon of sole purpose and understanding. We measure to advocate as a pick-me-up, to use metrics to market an individual or a group. We measure for accountability, plotting progress against objectives, whether internally or externally. We measure for acclaim, to use indicators to compare one entity to another. We are better than them, they are not as good as us, things like that. And then we also measure to adapt, the use of indicators to incentivize certain behaviors, change, and grow. And finally, measure to allocate. Any activity or result in some kind of reward or entity being measured, and we often do this with internal data within our institution to allocate resources. This is a matrix that we created to really show the risk factors of evaluating researchers. All of those types of analysis are on each row to analyze, advocate, accountability, acclaim, and we've ranked them or associated some impact risk. So for instance, a country, to understand their research ecosystem, to analyze, to understand, is green. It doesn't impose that much risk on a country, but doing that to understand for an individual is yellow or orange, depending on the color, might create more of a risk for that individual due to inherent bias and things like that. And so when you think about measuring to allocate to an individual, it's in red, because there are inherent biases. If I said the H index is going to be the predictor of how much money I give you for your startup package when you get hired, we know that there are some inherent bias within publications about gender bias, early career scientists, and things like that. And so it creates a high risk or high impact on that individual. There's also a disparity in scholarly disciplines. The arts and humanities don't have the same type of outputs or measures to be able to use those things together like other STEM fields and biomedical fields. We also want to ask the question, do we need to evaluate at all? We don't really fatten a pig by weighing it. We have to feed it, right? So we have to feed our researchers what we actually value as an institution. Measuring is also not the only way to incentivize behavior. Changing behavior requires understanding. Why do we do this? Why are we doing this type of research? It's because it's our mission to impact the commonwealth of our state or of our community. The capabilities, how do we do this? Through training and support. Teaching is publication output as important as training the next generation of researchers, and so forth. So there again is the scope framework. And then I'm not going to talk about this much because it was talked about this morning, but the journal impact factor, you know, it's a mean to measure journals, not individuals. And then the H index, I think we've heard this morning a lot about that, and most of you in the room probably have your own opinions about those measures. But how are we using PURE for responsible research evaluation? After all, this isn't supposed to be an INORMS presentation, but University of Kentucky. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're using it in our implementation in the last remaining time that I have. So when we implemented PURE, we did it solely as a portal function. It is not an assessment tool. It is not potentially a CRIS system in which you all might have implemented yours to collect a lot of data to then measure and do outputs. We wanted it simply to have standardized websites of research output across the campus of all researchers on campus. And so implementation was purpose-driven, and we thought about the purpose and goals in mind. So is it for evaluation? No. Did we made sure that our researchers knew and understood that it wasn't to evaluate them, it was to have an easy way for them to have a presence online for their colleagues within campus, as well as the world to be able to find them. We also understood that clear communication concerning the purposes helps support buy-in. So, you know, when we implemented and someone's H-index within PURE was lower than Google Scholar, we had to communicate why that was and why it actually doesn't really matter and you should hide it. So making sure that they understood that it wasn't to show a lower number of them, it was to show data that was clearly vetted, that supported some of the missions and work that we do at the university. We also wanted to make sure that it helped create accountability for researchers, and I'll share that a little bit later on, but particularly in the arts and humanities. So we constantly hear at our research institution that we don't support the arts and humanities. Well, we do. We provide lots of seed funding, pilot funding to them. We provide them platforms like this. But because they don't see themselves in things like Scopus and other index data sources, they really feel left behind. And so we made sure that we said, we're not buying Pure for the biomedical sciences, we're buying it for all of campus. And you have to meet us halfway. We provide resources and training so that they can know how they can use it to impact their work. But then also researchers have an active role in the evaluation process. If we end up using Pure in systems like this for evaluation, it's on them to make sure that the content is updated and comprehensive so that we are evaluating, if we do, or assessing them on equal playing field. So thinking about the scope framework and how we implement Pure, one of the things that we're doing is, that I really like, is the data collection tool of all of the relations. So without something like Pure, you can't really, it's really difficult to understand research output connections. When I get a large NIH grant, yes, we report to the NIH the publications that come out of it, the data sets that come out of it, any prizes or honors or things like that. And they should be cited within the journal, but it often doesn't happen, and it's really hard and manual process for individuals to find that information. So Pure allows us to do that. It allows the attachment of documents and things like that, and so what we're using is the impact module to start collecting assessment data or evaluation data at our institution. And the way we're not using it the same way that individuals in the UK may use it for the REF or other public impact statements. We have it locked down to be private because our faculty and researchers would be up in arms if we said that you had to do this impact and everyone could see that you received $50,000 to do a pilot study that led to nothing. And so it is private behind the scenes, but it is a way for us to go away from, let's see, replacing manual reporting processes, getting an Excel template of their grant or their pilot funding and saying, okay, every year tell me the papers that you published. Now they can do it within Pure, they can make those associations or relations, and then in the reporting module, I can go back out and pull a report for my leadership and individuals as well. We also use the impact module to create that narrative, the qualitative part of it. So when a researcher receives seed funding for a pilot project, and maybe it is to deliver some training out in the community, so it's not going to have a publication, they actually can go there and describe what they did. They met with faith-based communities and did diabetes education in the African American communities and talk about the impact that that had, which led to more questions and things like that. And it allows us to collect that qualitative data and information in a more cohesive way. Real time, whenever they want within the period. They don't have to wait for the annual reporting time. And then they can fill out that information, provide evidence for that. And a lot of that evidence can also then be used for other things like our regional accreditation as an institution and things like that. We have easier access to that evidence. So we're using it for internal seed projects, primarily for things coming out of the Office of the Vice President for Research. And one reason is to make my life easier so that we don't have to collect Word files, Excel files. Because when we do that, my leadership then says all of a sudden, well, how many papers from that one program? Well, I have to then go through all those manual files and do some counting. Doing it in Pure allows me to be able to do it more efficiently and effectively, and then record the additional outcomes of those qualitative things. And it puts the work on the researcher to be able to do it themselves. Okay, so I went through all that fast because 25 minutes is fast and I talk a lot, but this is my last slide. So I wanted to go ahead and promote the INORMS work a little bit more. So in the keynote, one of the things was awareness. How do we know about it? How do we get more people? And it's just getting people aware. So there's a link to the INORMS Responsible Research Evaluation Working Group, as well as the listserv. And then just a quick shout out that a lot of this work about open science and responsible research evaluation seems to be lagging in the United States. Europe and other parts of the world seem to be more progressive in wanting to make an impact. And so a lot of this hasn't come over to the United States. So thankfully, through the work of the INORMS working group, myself serving as the PI, the U.S. Institute for Museum and Library Services has awarded us a $150,000 grant to host the first ever Responsible Research Evaluation Forum, all focused on the scope framework in the United States in early 2024. So it is open to international participation. There'll be travel stipends available so you can have part of your travel potentially paid. And so we hope that you might look at that information and help drive that conversation in the United States. With that, I assume I have some time or for questions. Yeah. So.
Is this on? Good. Baron, thank you. Excellent presentation, and also thank you for being a pure pioneer on the impact front in North America. So I was, as you were talking, I was considering something you said really quite early on in your presentation, which was about what to evaluate on the initial kind of setting in there. And I was just wondering, and this might be a comment, but it might also be a question. How does that square off with the ability to structure kind of ongoing evaluation of all impact? So I'm thinking about this kind of notion. So one of the things that we've been looking at in our own impact work in this last year is the extent to which you need to be have close proximity to events and activities in relation to gather the best forms of evidence that impact and so forth. But if you're retrospectively looking at what to evaluate and making choices there, then you retrospectively can't gather that information. So I'm just kind of wondering how you think that might kind of play out.
Well, I'll try to answer. I think I understand what you're asking or commenting on. I think even in the earlier keynotes address, I was thinking all about how to get my institution to sign up. And because it's things exactly what you mentioned about meetings and the impact and the outcomes of some of that work, we have to be able to capture it somehow first, right? And so one of the ways, we're doing a lot of work at our university on social innovation and things like that, but we have no place to necessarily capture it because it is not a patent, it's not the same type of social innovation or technology. And so the only way to do that is through press releases and things, but then where do we keep that? We don't keep a record of it. So using something like Pure allows us to do that. But what we end up doing is evaluate with the evaluated. So those arts and humanities folks that really complained to our group about funding and resources, we said to them, well, here's the seat at the table. You tell us, what are your impacts? How do we measure you? How do we talk about, and when we say measure, we don't necessarily measure for promotion and tenure in our office, but it's how do we measure to tell the world how great you are in the work that you're doing, right? Because when we get dollars, we announce them to the world, right? Because we got these millions of dollars. And so how do we do that for them? And so we bring them to the table. And I will say it's been a struggle for them. Our definition of research, we would say research and scholarly activity or research, scholarly activity and creative work. Well, they argued that their work is research, it's not separate. And we're like, oh, we thought we were including you by saying creative work. So now we don't actually ever use that. We say research, and our definition of research is hard sciences, biomedical, STEM, and pottery, arts and humanities and things like that. So I don't know if that addresses your question, but I think it's a culture change in trying to get some of that information.
Yeah, no, you did. I think the key point was evaluate with the evaluate the evaluator.
Evaluate.
I can't get it right, but yeah, so like making sure that the seat at the table is there and they're aware of why the information capture is as important as it is. Thank you.
Yeah, and a lot of our evaluation, even using the impact module, when we are doing assessment of our pilot programs. So when we have programs where we give researchers money for seed programs and things, our evaluation is not about the success of that individual. It is more strategy for us. Did we make the guidelines of the use of those dollars appropriate? Are we seeing outcomes of it? And so it's more strategic alignment for us in our resource allocation versus this individual didn't have any papers, we're no longer going to fund them again. It's more qualitative about the programmings that we're offering. So, any other questions?
So my question is, how do you get leadership to shift their focus from what they've been doing for years, this evaluation that is very targeted and pointed, to this broader definition of evaluation?
So at our institution, I don't think we're fully, we fully don't embrace rankings and evaluation and some of the other things that other institutions struggle with. Our president is all about the mission to support the Commonwealth of Kentucky and our citizens. And so, for instance, for anyone there are some U.S. Individuals here. So anyone familiar with the Association of AAU, the Association of Research Universities? It's an elite group of research institutions that have a lot of political power. And there's talk about how do we join that? Well, the first question the president said, well, what is it going to give us? It's going to give us the reputation, but does that reputation meet the needs of our citizens? And so we don't want to do those things just to get a reputation. We want to do it because it's going to support us. And so we talk about things, well, it will support us because faculty will want to come to our institution because we're a member of this elite group and we'll recruit better students and better research and things like that. I will say that it's harder to get leadership to buy into some of this work. So we apply the scope framework within my office because I'm on the INORMS group, and so when I'm asked to assess our programs, I use it. But to sign up for some of those other things, my president would say a lot of like, well, so why does this matter? And it would be harder for me because, well, is the Association of Public Land Grant Universities going to sign up first? I don't want to be the only one or the first one, and so that is harder. So when I was thinking during the keynote, how can I take this back? Lizzie Gadd, I texted her while you were speaking, and she said, oh, I'm hoping that University of Kentucky would be one of the first U.S. Organizations to sign up for the initiative. And I was like, how am I going to get even my vice president for research to understand the importance? And so it's an ecosystem. It's the research office with the provost office, with faculty affairs, changing the promotion and tenure process even. So the evaluation that occurs on our campus is largely promotion and tenure. How do I get tenure and full professorship? And that's number of publications, H-index, those kinds of things. And so we have to insert ourselves into that process and say, this is why we think it's not that good of a thing to do. So.
All right, thank you very much. Yep. I think we are at the end of time. Next talk will start at 10:30. In here about impact, and in the next room about pure civil integration. Thank you very much, Baron.